In this tutorial, we're going to look at how we can acquire, graph, and analyze energy intensity data in order to compare energy between countries and states. There are a variety of energy statistics that are important in order to compare energy. The two most obvious ones are production and consumption, both of which are measured in BTU, a commonly used unit of energy. However, when we want to compare energy between countries or states of different sizes, either different sized populations or different sized economies, we want to use a statistic that accounts for those differences in size. Per capita energy consumption takes the total energy consumed by a country or state and divides it by its total population, yielding the statistic BTU per person, which allows us to compare states or countries of different population sizes. Energy intensity works in a similar way. In this case, we take the total energy consumed by the country or state and divide it by the GDP, or gross domestic product, which is a measure of the economic activity in the country or state. It gives us a statistic of BTU consumed per dollar of GDP, allowing us to compare countries or states with different sized economies, and allows us in a rough way to compare the energy efficiency of those economies. So where do we get the data to compute these statistics? Well, there are a lot of sources, but probably the easiest one to use is the U.S. Energy Information Administration, so we'll start there. On the EIA's main page, we can access data for different sized geographies. In this case, what we're going to do is look at comparing energy intensity data for two countries, the United States and France. So we'll go to Countries, and then on the Countries page, we'll click on Data, Total Energy, and then Consumption and Intensity. This will bring up an interactive table where we can select the countries or regions of interest, the time frame they're interested in, and then the statistic that we want. So as I said, we're looking here to compare the US and France. So it's organized in alphabetical order, so we'll find France first, check it off, and then the United States, and then go back to the top and hit close. You'll see it lists both countries now. Then we'll pick the statistic of interest. Here we're looking for energy intensity. There are two options here, and either one can work, but we're going to choose the first one. And then the time frame. And we're going to start from 2000, and we'll see how far it goes. 2012 is the last date listed here. We'll click on the Update button to update the table, and the table changes to show us two records, one for the US and one for France, both extending from the year 2000 to 2011, which apparently is the latest date available. Notice the units that we're using here. This is energy intensity, and the values in the cells are BTU per year 2005 US dollars, which means that these numbers are BTU, measure of energy, over year 2005 US dollars. And what that means is that the monetary data used in this equation are dollars that have been adjusted for inflation using the year 2005 as a benchmark. And this is what you do when you compute energy intensity properly. Okay, in order to look more closely at this data, we should probably download it. There's a link here to download the Excel file for this table. We'll open up that table, and we can see our data is ready to go here. So we can look at the table itself, and we can kind of see the relationship right off the bat, but it's a lot easier to understand the data when we graph it. So I'm going to enable editing on this table first, and then I'm going to highlight the cells that contain the data that we want to graph. Under the Insert menu, I'll choose Line, and we'll use a two-dimensional line to look at the data. And right off the bat, what we have now is a graph that shows us the US and France, and we can immediately see the similarities and differences between those two sets of data. We can see that in both cases, energy intensity has been declining over time. Although it looks like in the US it might be a slightly faster decline, but we'll examine that in a second. Now we want to add one more thing here. In addition to comparing the US and France, we also want to look at Massachusetts. So we're going to need to add the state data in order to examine that. In order to get energy intensity data for a US state, in this case Massachusetts, starting from the EIA's main web page, we can also go to Geography, and And this time, instead of going to countries, we'll go over to US states. From the US states page, we're going to go to Data and then choose 1960 to 2012 estimates. On this page, we're going to go to Data Files, and we're interested in looking at BTU values, since energy intensity is expressed in BTUs per dollar of GDP. And specifically, we're interested in the CSV, or comma separated values file, which essentially is a text file where the columns are separated by commas, although Excel will know how to open it. So I'm going to click on that link and it'll immediately prompt me to either save it or open it in Excel. I'm going to go ahead and open it. The table that gets created is going to have a lot of data in it, and it won't necessarily be intelligible at first. But I think when you look closely at it, you can notice that we have years along the top row. We've got at least one column that has what look like state abbreviations. That looks like Alaska for the first one. And then we also have a third column here that has a variety of cryptic codes of some sort. So we need another file in order to interpret what it is we're looking at. Back on the states page, we're going to scroll down a bit till we get to a link for codes and descriptions and click on that. That's going to open up an Excel file, and this time it's a little more properly formatted, and when we go to the MSN descriptions worksheet, what we'll see is an explanation for all of the different codes that we saw in the states data. Now remember that we're looking here for energy intensity data, so we're going to look here for something that tells us energy intensity. So it's not exactly intuitive here, but in this case, remember that we're looking for total energy intensity. So this is kind of organized in a sort of an alphabetical sense. So we're going to jump down to the T's, and we're going to look closely here, and there it is, TETGR, total energy consumed per dollar of real gross domestic product. That sounds like what we want. Now notice here too that the units for this measure of energy intensity are in 1,000 BTU per chained dollar. Well, we're going to ignore for the moment what per chained dollar means, but the 1,000 BTU per dollar, that's a little different than the values that we used for the country data, and you'll see that in a second. But we know what we're looking for. We're looking for the row with TETGR. So let's go back to the state data, and we're going to need to scroll down to find Massachusetts. So what I'm going to do first is I'm going to freeze that first row so I can still see the years as I scroll down. So under the View menu, I'm going to go to the Freeze panes. I'm going to freeze the top row, and that way that will not change as I scroll down. So I'm seeing the state abbreviations change as I go down, and I'm looking for MA for Massachusetts. Found it. Now I'm looking for TETGR, and there it is. Okay, so that's the row we want, and we're looking specifically for the same years that we use for the country data, which extends from the year 2000 to at least 2011. Here it goes all the way to 2012. So I'm going to just highlight the cells that I need. Oops, a little too early. 2000 going to 2011, since that's what I have for the country data, and I'm going to copy that, and then I'm going to go back into the country data Excel sheet that I was working on, and I'm going to paste it down here for the moment just to illustrate something. So if you look at the values that I just copied from the state data, they look like small numbers, 5.04, 4.91, and I look at these values up here for the countries, and they're much larger. Let me get rid of those decimal points though so that they look a little more comparable. Okay. So these numbers are much larger, and the reason is that these numbers from the state, as you recall, are in 1,000 BTU per dollar of GDP, and what that means is that they've essentially divided these numbers by 1,000. So if you want to return these numbers back to be comparable, they have to be multiplied by 1,000. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to add a row here called Massachusetts, and I'm going to take a formula, and I'm going to take the values here and multiply them by 1,000 to make them comparable. Now I can copy this formula is across the way. Let's move the graph out of the way a little bit here. So now the numbers look very similar, so they are comparable. So now I'm going to add the state data to the graph. So I'm going to right click on the graph and choose Select Data. This opens up the dialog window that controls the graph. And I'm going to add a new data series. And I'll start with the series values. Click on that button there and then highlight the cells that contain the state data. Hit the Enter key. And the series name, click on Massachusetts. Hit Enter. Okay, now you see the Massachusetts data has been added to the graph. In addition, notice that the horizontal axis is just numbered. We want to add the years because that's what that should show. So over here where it says horizontal category x-axis labels, I'll click Edit and I'm going to choose the values that contain the years that we're going to use. So I'll hit Enter again. And notice they've been added to the graph. So now the graph has what I need. We've got the 3 different units to compare, US, France, and Massachusetts. We have the years on the bottom. And I want to make this graph look a little better, so I'm going to move it to its own worksheet. So I'm going to right click on it, choose Move Chart, New Sheet, hit OK. And it gets added to its own worksheet so we can see it a little more closely. So it looks a little better. So there's a few things I want to adjust here. So I'm looking at this data and I can see basically the trend of the lines, but I want to really exaggerate the behavior of the lines so I can really get a sense of the changes that happened over time. So I'm going to adjust the vertical axis here so that the numbers are of a smaller range. Essentially I want to make it so that the smallest number is only going to be about 3,000 and the highest number will only be 9,000, and that will exaggerate the trend of the lines, or rather the shape of them. So to do that, I click on that axis so it becomes highlighted by a bounding box, and I right click and I'll choose Format Axis. And on the axis options, I'm going to change the minimum to a fixed value. I'm going to specify that I want the lowest value on this graph to be 3,000, and I want also the maximum, I want to change it to 9,000. And when I close that, you'll see that the graph has kind of shrunk on the vertical dimension, which kind of pulls out the dips and the lines and kind of shows the differences a little better, I think. We want to add a couple more things to this graph. We're going to format it so that we can add a title to it. So when I click on the graph, you'll see the context menu up here at the menu bar changes on the ribbon. Click on the Layout tab, right? And I want to add an axis title to this graph so that I want to label what the units are over here. So under the axis title menu, I'm going to choose the drop down. I'm going to say primary vertical axis, and I want a rotated tile, one that kind of is parallel to the vertical axis, right? So you see that axis title is added there. Now what do we call that? Well, we want to go back to the units that we're working here. So as you recall, the data we're working here is energy consumption per dollar GDP, and in this case the values are BTU per year 2005 US dollars. So I'm just going to copy that text right there and go back to my chart. I'm going to edit the axis title, so I click on it once and I see the blinking cursor. And it's kind of an odd angle because you're coming at it vertically. So I'm going to hit Control A on my keyboard. It highlights the whole thing, and then I'm just going to hit Control V to paste in. Control V to paste in the text that I just copied. Okay, so I just basically copied and pasted that text describing what those units are. And lastly, what I do is click again on the chart. I want to add a title to it. So I click on the layout, and I'm going to add a chart title. Okay, and I want it to be above the chart, so it makes room for it. There, it's going to be where the chart title is. And again, I'm going to copy the text over here and copy this text right here. And I'm doing this, of course, to save time and effort. Come back to the chart title. Okay. And again, Control V to paste. And I've pasted in there, so now I've got a nice title. I've got labels for the x-axis, and I can see the values. Now I'm ready to talk about this chart at more length, and I'm also ready to insert it in another document if I want. And there I've created my graph.